Hi, and welcome back to the Mob Mentality Show. I'm Chris Lucian, and co-host is Austin Chadwick. And today we want to talk a little bit about, having that expert in the room mobbing full time with the team, rather than maybe being periodically available, and what that might be like. So, Austin kind of has a story to share, and then we can kind of bounce experiences off of each other. So, Austin, why don't you take it away?
Yeah. And I think your intro is spot on. I think I would say 90% or more of my mob programming experience has had, I would say definitely high in health, like a healthy relationship with domain experts, where the feedback loops were very tight. Not instantaneous, but they were very tight. So it'd be like, we have a question and we're not waiting very long for an answer, right? Um, and so whether we reach out over chat and then they get back to us in under an hour, or it's like you just roll your chair over to them because they're in a different part of the building, or you call them or something like that and bring them into the mob. Because the goal is to have the whole system in the room. So if you're making a decision that's critical to domain, you want the domain person who knows the domain to weigh in, right? And I think for the last, let me look at the time. I can say about 10 months, I've had the experience of mobbing full time with a domain expert. So, to set the context a little bit, we are working in a very specific IoT space with a very specific type of customer. And the person I've been mobbing with full time is a domain expert. In not only like hardware, but also from the customer's perspective of like what they need, how they talk, what language they use, how they use products, very specific details about the environment in which the product is used. And so lots of training, lots of experience, multiple companies in this domain, right? So um, super, super valuable. And so it's been fascinating to see the result of that. And I guess I can start going into stories, but before I do, Chris, have you ever had a similar experience, I guess?
Well, you remind me a lot of the contrasts that I've talked about often, where of product owner availability. So,
Yes.
um, I'll just maybe before you continue with your story, I think it's really kind of the natural extreme of this story that I tell of the four product owners that we had at the same time. And so,
Oh, yes.
years ago now, we had a situation where we were on site, we weren't remote, and that context is important because we had four different product owners on four different products, and one of them was available, regularly. You could go as far as to say that they sat within earshot of the software developers, so
Mhm.
they were available for questions at any time. And if anybody asked like a wondering question, just like out of nowhere, that person would just be there to answer. We had somebody there that was daily, but only available once a day. Maybe answered chat or email from time to time. We had another product owner that was available once a week, and we finally had another product owner that was available once a month. And the cycle time and productivity of those teams were starkly different from each other. And so we ran these teams, roughly the same way. They were all mobbing, TDD, XP, Kanban, and there were just a lot more problems on the team that had the product owner available only monthly. And so once we were able to get that product owner available daily, which uh, was also related to us going remote. So during COVID, we went remote, and then and then we went away from the face-to-face culture because while we were in person, people would be like, "No, wait, don't go to the other building." You see him walking across from one building to the next, and avoiding our building because he's got to get somewhere. And so you'd see software developers chasing him down the street trying to ask him questions. Um, and so the product owner went from being available only monthly to being available daily, and all of a sudden the cycle time improved, the bug count improved, the interpretation of the feature requirements improved, and it was night and day for the team productivity. It was just like how often they could ask questions. So I certainly feel like the natural extreme of this is mobbing full time with that person. So like maybe
Yeah.
continue there.
Yeah, no, that's exactly that's correlated really well with my experiences as well. The cases where, yeah, product delivery is um, continuous delivery tends to be lower, and corporate anxiety about the product is higher, has a strong correlation with the product owner or the domain expert feedback loops, right? Yeah, so th those are critical or key, right? And so, yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think some of the obvious things um, held true. Like, what would it be like if, the domain person or the product owner type person was always available in the mob, already as a driver or navigator or mobber? The kind of obvious things that were true was any obvious domain question, obviously didn't have the queuing up of, oh, we need to go find the person to ask the question, right? So they were just there to answer right away, right? Super cool. Um, some of the unexpected things was code naming, right? And so I even had an experience earlier today where we're having this discussion of like, okay, we're going to make this thing and it's going to do this or that, and we're going to store it here. And then we go off and the navigator starts navigating and the driver's implementing it. And since this person is in the rotation, they'll speak up and say, yes, that sounds great. However, instead of calling it X, let's call it Y because that's what they really call it in the field. And if you called it Y, you might be talking about something else, right? And
Right.
so, kind of the course correction as the name is being formed, as opposed to, let's say, it was the older style and they came in for a discussion and the code happened to be on the screen and then they comment on it like, hey, we don't really call it that, we call it that.
Yeah.
Um,
Is that
Instead of
the
that name getting propagated all throughout the code, this
right? Yeah.
misleading name, the quality is baked in as the variable or, class or module name is being created at that moment. And so,
It's like the acceleration of the seven stages of naming, but you just
yes,
have it happen right away, right?
yes, exactly, exactly. And yeah, so that yeah, and it is really fun to see. And I think for this particular person, their technology is fairly strong, but they have quite a bit of growth. But where they really shine is the naming of things like that, and it also shows up in tests. So, for example, um, at least in recent experiences, this person would wait to weigh in on naming till the end sometimes. And it was actually kind of interesting to see the progress because the rest of the mob is like, okay, so we have a test. Given this, when this occurs, then do this. So we kind of have our given when then, arrange act to start going on and our best shot at, baking the domain into the test scenario, right? And then what's interesting is then he'll wait to the end and then he'll give his edit. And it's really cool to see the before and after because the BDD scenario way more aligns with the real world as opposed to kind of developer speak attempts at trying to align with the real world, right? And so you get that knowledge that's much more aligned with the actual reality you're trying to map in the code into the tests, into the names, into those kinds of things. And so I think that's the biggest thing that's jumped out to me. That was just like a really, really cool win. Yeah. Yeah.
This sort of reminds me as well of when we kind of merged our testers into the mob, where like kind of the first time
Yes.
that we were kind of going away from, we had shifted left all of our tests. Like we didn't call it back that back then, but all of our tests shifted left, our test cases, and so our cycle time was purely dependent on our delivery pipeline, and so our manual testers had less and less to do, and so they started joining in. So there's like rather than domain knowledge, but just the ability to analyze a system for defects earlier in the process went way up. And so I know that those people taught the software developers on the team more about testing, and then the developers on the team taught the former testers more about development, and their skills kind of mixed and matched as time went on. And so that was a really cool experience, and the ideation around test cases for TDD scenario became a lot faster. I run into a lot of developers that have trouble kind of maybe saying what the test case might be. And so, I think that became very fluid in the team when that happened. Um, so kind of on the devil's advocate side, if
Yes.
that person is, a domain expert, but they spend all of their time writing code with the team, then gradually over time, it would stand to reason that that person would spend enough time away from the domain that the domain would then evolve beyond, what their experiences are. So, um,
Hmm.
do you have that same sort of concern, or is there other things that can be done to improve the connection of developers with the domain beyond that?
Yeah, I don't know if I have a solution for you there. I think that is a good critique, is that I think I don't think it would go to zero, because a
Right.
healthy mob, I think, is involved in the domain, whether directly with the customers, the stakeholders, or doing the fun walkthroughs where you go watch the user use the product, or use the product with them in the field, and that kind of thing. That kind of stuff will still happen in a healthy mob. But as opposed to them being 100% in that world, where that's what they lived and breathed all the time,
Right.
you're right. That knowledge would start to fade. And so, yeah, I don't know if there is a solution to that, other than I think it's probably just a natural result of autonomy, right?
Right.
So I think in the cultures we advocate for, autonomy is one of the pillars, right? And so the pros and cons of autonomy is, if Austin wants to learn more about X, that means he's not learning about Y, right? And so in this particular case, if a domain expert wants to become more tightly integrated to the mob and less living and breathing in the field, then that is the natural consequence of that, right? And so I think I think what it means, though, is you can't, and that actually is our current pattern. They're not the only spokesman, they speak for the trees, not the only Lorax for the domain, right? So there are still people who are still living and breathing in the domain, who will speak from fresh experiences into the mob. And so, yeah, maybe it's a mix. You can't just like, oh, we only have domain experts in the mob and we don't listen to anybody else. That might be the wrong extreme here. And so,
Yeah, or maybe it makes sense. Yeah, I think even in like the Fred George programmer anarchy world, the expectation is that the developers spend enough time to become domain experts on some level.
sure, right.
And so, maybe field trips are the right thing to do, or some other thing like that. But it's kind of a good question to ponder on. But it is super cool when you have somebody really knowledgeable in the domain there with you, and and just like I think every type of mobbing, when we add a DevOps engineer into the mob, or add a security engineer into the mob, then or a testing engineer, all of these different, and the way I think about titles even is everybody could be mobbing together, but your title just means that you're going to learn in that direction proactively if you're doing like personal learning time. And if you take that mindset where you can always mob, but you spend time learning in a particular direction that increases the diversity of knowledge on the mob, then you have this really cool side effect of, all the answers in those different domains are there when putting the code together. And
Right.
so yeah, so in my head it's like optimizing for diversity of learning, and and even possibly like if your team was big enough, like learning cohorts, like this group of people really studies a lot in DevOps, but they're on separate teams from each other. So they go to learn together, and then they go back to their individual teams to then bring those. You might have like this hub and spoke model or something like that. So
Nice, 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 nice. Yeah, awesome. I think I just have a couple more quick thoughts, and then I think
yeah,
we can close down. But one other cool side effect I've noticed is it's similar to just having diversity in the mob in general, in that it's just different perspective, right? And so I think there's kind of like a natural devil advocate, just built out of curiosity, right? So someone who's less living and breathing the dev world, when they look at code or they look at a problem or look at a user scenario, their perspective is just different, right? And so it raises questions that the mob has to answer that they haven't even thought of. And so it's just kind of like a natural's devil's advocate. And also, when you live and breathe in the dev world, sometimes cryptic code becomes less cryptic because you're so used to seeing it. And so there's definitely been many moments where they're just like, I know what's going on here because you're using good names, but here it's just like complete techno babble, where to the rest of the mob, we're kind of like used to seeing like, oh, that's just kind of how this code works in this weird situation. And so that's been a nice benefit. And then the other thing too is I've read the domain-driven design book, but I've not been involved in like the conferences or deeply into the community. But one hypothesis is I wonder if this realizes the domain-driven design dream to a certain degree with less moving parts. So there's nothing wrong with a lot of the events that I've heard talk about in the DDD community to get the domain into the teams, but it feels like a lot of the moves are assuming the two are separate or isolated to a degree or something like that, right? And so it's a solution to a problem where just like with many things with mobbing, if the whole system is in the room already, do you achieve what you're looking for with less, you know, uh, widgets and things to make it happen, I guess. And
Right.
so,
Right.
yeah. Yeah. Any other thoughts? We'll close this one down.
Yeah, no, it's a really good thought, and so maybe for our audience, it may be good to find that domain expert and maybe invite them to stay with you for a day and see how it goes. Just experiment in this area. Chat with us in the comments, share your experiences, and we'll like, subscribe, share, and we'll see you all next time.
Adios. Thanks,
Bye,
everybody.
everybody.